Good afternoon to all of you and welcome to this very interesting webinar that the Nelson Mandela School of Governance is very proud and privileged to be hosting today. My name is Faisal Ismail. I'm the director of the Nelson Mandela School of Public Governance. And with us today are a fabulous group of people that have all agreed to participate in this discussion that we will be continuing on the theme, the African Continental Free Trade Area and Africa's Structural Transformation. The particular focus of the discussion today is going to be on the contribution of agro-processing to Africa's industrialization strategy. By way of background, I should remind you that the Nelson Mandela School of Public Governance in 2020 launched a program of dialogues, public dialogues across the African continent on the broad theme of the African Continental Free Trade Area and Transformative Industrialization. You will recall that in early 2020, the African Continental Free Trade Area appointed a Secretary General, Mr. Wamkele Mene, who then took up residence really in Accra, in Ghana, where the Secretariat is now based. And as the Secretariat began its work of completing the negotiations on the free trade agreement and beginning to implement the agreement, the school, the Nelson Mandela School, decided that we wanted to broaden the discussion beyond trade, because we were very aware that trade on its own will not deliver the benefits of economic development to all the countries on the African continent, at least not at the same time. There would be some costs and there would be some adjustments that would have to be made by some of the countries. Some of them would make significant gains and some less gains. So we thought in order to spread the gains and spread the benefits of free trade, we should launch a program of linking the African Continental Free Trade Area to industrialization, to how African countries could beneficiate their commodities, especially in agriculture, in order to spread the benefits of the agreement to the less developed countries on the African continent, who could also then contribute to intra-regional trade, not just by exporting commodities, but also contributing to the building of regional value chains and increasing the value of their own production through these industrial value chains. We were very aware that for Africa to truly benefit from regional integration, it'll have to do more than simply open its markets. It'll also have to address issues of technology transfer, of financial development institutions that could support industrialization. Non-tariff barriers will have to be addressed. Logistics and trade facilitation infrastructure will have to be built and advanced, including transport, rail and road and ports. All these matters will need to be addressed simultaneously as we implement the free trade agreement. And it is with this broad objective in mind that we identified a few high priority regional value chains. And on the top of that list is agriculture and agro-processing. Of course, there are others that we've also begun to work on, including cotton, textiles and apparel, vaccines and pharmaceuticals, renewable energy, and a few others. We did launch the first discussion on agriculture in November of 2020 with a group of experts from across the continent. And that first webinar was moderated by Professor Carlos Lopez, who did an excellent job in identifying some of the key challenges, underlying key challenges in agriculture on the African continent. Today, we are very fortunate to have with us Dr. Nonkedu Vutula, who has joined our school as a full-time research fellow. She is leading our research stream on the AfCFTA and regional value chains. And she has brought together an excellent group of experts from across the African continent who have worked in agriculture for many years to take this discussion forward, deepening it and also extending it to a few potential subsectors in agriculture to explore how we can work together with the discussions that are going on trade and regional integration to strengthen the capacity of the African continental free trade area to facilitate industrialization as well on the African continent. Dr. Vutula has worked in agriculture for many years. She has been a researcher and a government official working in agriculture for the government of South Africa in the Department of Agriculture, last known as DALRAD, Department of Agriculture and Land. She did participate as well in trade negotiations at the highest level in Geneva as a representative to the World Trade Organization. She chaired a committee on SPS, sanitary and phytosanitary measures. And she has completed her PhD on agriculture and trade and is undoubtedly well-placed to lead the discussion today. So I'm going to hand you over to Nonkedu to introduce to you the first session for this morning. And also she will introduce you to the speakers that she has brought together to contribute to the discussion on how to build the competitiveness and also enhance food security in a context of climate change and adaptation. So over to you, Nonkedu.
Thank you, Professor Ismail, for the introduction. It is my great pleasure to moderate this session, which will focus on the competitiveness of Africa's agricultural sector. Before presenting our distinguished panelists for this session, I will briefly contextualize this topic. As many of you may know, agriculture is a major income-generating sector for many African countries. According to the 2020 African Economic Outlook published by the African Development Bank, agriculture generates about 15% of the continent's GDP annually. Moreover, this sector employs about 70% of Africa's workforce, making it a significant income source for many households. However, agriculture and food trade is low, and this is particularly due to the fluctuating commodity prices, which have worsened because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and more recently, the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Overall, what is the most concerning is that the African continent as a whole has been a net importer of food for over 2 decades. The main reasons for the high food import bill in Africa ranges from population growth, low and stagnating agricultural productivity, policy distortions, weak institutions, poor infrastructure, and changing consumption patterns. Ironically, most of the food imported into Africa can be produced in Africa at a lower cost. In this context, the African Continental Free Trade Area is expected to generate economic, trade, and industrialization opportunities for Africa, including agriculture and the food sector, through the removal of tariffs on 90% of all goods traded between member states. The AfCFTA will also offer opportunities for building partnerships and increasing investment in regional value chains, which will create value addition on the continent. Agriculture and agro-processing can be used as catalysts for economic transformation in Africa through the provision of raw materials and inputs for processing plants in the industry. The different topics of today's webinar will tease out some of the concrete steps that can be taken to leverage the vast potential of the agricultural sector through the value chains. So enough of me talking. Let me introduce our presenters who have taken time out of their busy schedules to participate in this webinar. We are very grateful for your attendance and contributions. First, we have Professor Antoine Bouet, who is a Senior Research Fellow for the International Food Policy Research Institute, having joined IFPRI in February 2005. His areas of research interest include global trade modeling, trade policies, regional agreements, multilateral trade negotiations, and informal cross-border trade. He is also a professor of economics at the University of Bordeaux in France. He has previously developed the model of the marriage for world economy, which is used for trade policy analysis. He has also developed a database on market access. Since 2009, he is a co-editor of the Africa Agriculture Trade Monitor, which is an annual flagship publication of IFPRI and Academia 2063. The next speaker for this session is Professor Sylvester Mpandeli, who is currently an executive manager at the Water Research Commission. He joined the Water Research Commission as a research manager responsible for water utilization in agriculture. Prof. Mpandeli is an adjunct professor at the University of Venda. And before then, he also practiced as a professor at the same school from 2013 to 2018. He has also worked at the Agricultural Research Council, the Institute for Soil, Climate and Water for 9 years. Professor Mpandeli also serves as a board member of Access and chairs the advisory board of the Water Joint Program Initiative. My next speaker for this session is Dr. Jane Ezirigwe, who is a senior research fellow at the Nigerian Institute of Advanced Legal Studies. She also teaches international trade law as an adjunct senior lecturer at Beham University, Karoo in Nigeria. She holds a PhD in law from the University of Cape Town. She is an established researcher in the areas of food and agricultural law, international trade, and natural resources development. She is also committed to mainstream gender in her research and is focused on using social legal methods to produce evidence-based research. Dr. Jane has contributed to several discussions on the AfCFTA and food and agricultural law at the national, continental, and global levels. She has recently been appointed to the AfCFTA Advisory Council, which works with the AfCFTA Secretariat. She's also a fellow on business law in Africa and a Young African Leaders Initiative. Before I give the floor to the first speaker for the day, I would like to inform you that the second session is going to be moderated by Dr. Nyoni, whom I will introduce when that session begins. In this session, we will allow each panelist to present, and after all the panelists have presented, we will take a few questions from the participants. Participants are also encouraged to use the Q&A feature for posting questions. I would also like to inform fellow panelists and Dr. Nyoni will moderate the next session that one of our speakers is not able to join us. So that gives us a bit of time. Having said that, I would like to invite Professor Antoine Bowe to speak about the competitiveness of agriculture in Africa. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you very much for the invitation. So I would like to talk about the competitiveness of African agriculture. As mentioned by Nonchedo, I am the editor of the Africa Agriculture Trade Monitor report, which is a flagship publication of IFPRI and Academia 2063. And the idea of this report is to publish annually a report full of statistics on trade. So the issue of competitiveness is very important, and it is focusing also on agriculture. And we try to improve the quality of trade statistics and to provide consistent trade indicators and also policy recommendation. It is released every year, early September. So all the graph and tables that I will show in this presentation come from the recent AATM reports. And so the two questions that I would like to address during this presentation is first, the questions of competitiveness of Africa agriculture. And I would like to respond to the questions, is the African Continental Free Trade Area a game changer? Concerning competitiveness, I think that regional value chains, in particular in agro-processing, can increase value added and employment in Africa. So this is really a very important objective that can be very productive. The problems and the literature, empirical and theoretical literature in economics, has shown recently that regional value chains need very low trading costs. And the idea, of course, is intuitive, because in a regional value chain, products has to cross the border several times for transformation. And to have an efficient productive process, the trading cost has to be low. And so this is the concern today in Africa. At the level of the continent, the trading costs are still relatively high. It is not exactly the same picture concerning regional economic communities. And so I will show you also some work that we did on the estimations of the potential impact of the AfCFTA. The same concern, the main concern is the fact that today the African countries trade more with the rest of the world than with African countries. And so the basis of this agreement is not very large. If you think about history, for example, in Europe, the success of the European Union comes from the fact that the basis of trade was already relatively large. And so if you remove trading costs in a group of countries where trade is relatively large, the impulse, the stimulation on exports and economic activity is relatively large. It is not exactly the case in Africa. So I think that my conclusion is that the AfCFTA must be very ambitious in terms of addressing trading costs. I will try to explain what are these trading costs. So the first one is tariffs. So this is only a table on tariffs. And you see from this table, this is the most recent database on protection worldwide. And in 2019, Africa is the most protectionist continent. And this is also true in the agricultural sector. We can calculate with this database not only protection implemented at the border on imports, but also we can also calculate the protection that are faced by exports of a country when products that a country exports to the rest of the world get into other countries. And this is what we call access to foreign markets. And in terms of tariffs, the access to foreign markets of Africa is relatively good, which is, of course, a good news. But the problems is with non-tariff barriers. So non-tariff barriers, these are sanitary and phytosanitary barriers, but also technical barriers to trade. So these are regulations, so it's difficult to assess their importance. So what we did here is that we estimate the impact on trade. And we estimate the ad valorem equivalent of this barrier, that is to say, the import duty that is equivalent in terms of restrictive impact on trade. So for example, if you look at the top and the left of this table, in Benin, in the meat and edible meat offal sector, there is the statistics, which is 69.5%. It means that sanitary and phytosanitary barriers implemented by Benin in this sector are equivalent to an import duty of 69.5% in terms of impact on trade. So it's very restrictive. So non-tariff barriers are high in Africa, but they are as high as in other parts of the world, in Asia, in Latin America, in Europe, maybe more in Europe. They are higher in Europe, and in the US, they are very high. My concern is the fact that we also showed that least developed countries, and this is the case for many African countries, have more difficulties when facing these barriers. I think it's easier for a country like the US to face sanitary and phytosanitary barriers and to design a product that respects this regulation. So my concern is that it can have a more restrictive impact on African trade. There is also the questions of efficiency of custom procedure. So what we did here is that we calculated, so it is for 2016, unfortunately, but it is in the 2019 report. We calculated for each exporting African country in agriculture, the export costs that exporters are facing, not only in terms of import duties implemented by the country in which these products get into, but also export restriction applied by their own government, and also the efficiency of custom procedures in terms of time lost for border compliance, cost for border compliance, and cost for documentation compliance. And this is in agriculture. So you see that, for example, in the case of Congo Democratic Republic, the cost is very high. It is close to 90% of the value of the shipment. In other countries, it's better, but this is the main concern, inefficiency of custom procedure in Africa. And this is a concern for the emergence of regional value chain. What does agricultural trade say about African competitiveness? Here you have the share of African exports in world exports by sector from 2003 to 2019. And you see that it looks like African exports are very competitive in the cocoa sector, in the coffee sector, and in the tobacco sector. But also we have some good results in the sugar sector. We do not have all the sectors, unfortunately. We decided to focus on this report on these sectors. So the problem is to have a benchmark. Is it a comparative advantage or not? So what we do is that we calculate reveal comparative advantage. So it means that we compare the share of a product in a country's exports to the share of these products in world exports. And if the first one is larger than the latter, it means that this country has a comparative advantage. If you calculate some comparative advantage recently, we see that there are many comparative advantage in the cocoa sector, in the tobacco sector, in the sugar sector, in the coffee sector. I would like to make two comments. First, many of these products for which Africa has a comparative advantage are unprocessed products. There are a few semi-processed products, but more and more we see some semi-processed products or processed products for which Africa has a comparative advantage. So we see a dynamics now for 10 years. It looks like we have the emergence of products with processed products for which Africa has a comparative advantage. So this is very good. The second comment that I have is the fact that concerning, cereals and oilseeds and others, the problems is that Africa is specialized in niche products. That is to say, products for which the value of the world market is relatively small. So if you look at, for example, cereals, Africa has a comparative advantage in fonio, and fonio is a relatively small market value in terms of, it is around $500 million. While if you look at soybeans or wheat or maize, you have a value of the world market which is around $20 billion. So this is two concerns that I have. A good point for African trade, agricultural trade, is the fact that more and more African agricultural exports are towards not the EU, but emerging countries. And this is good because, for example, the European destinations is less and less respected by African exporters. And it is good because emerging countries have a higher economic growth. So it's better to export to a very dynamic market. Here, this is an interesting graph because we look at intra-African agricultural trade. It is not trade with the rest of the world, it is intra-African agricultural trade. And the good point is the fact that processed products are more and more taking place within concerning intra-African agricultural trade. And I think this is the best justification of the African Continental Free Trade Area, the fact that when Africa trade with the rest of the world, most of this trade is in the exports of unprocessed or semi-processed commodities, while within Africa, African countries trade between themselves more and more processed products. Another characteristics of African agricultural trade is the fact that it is within regional economic community. So for example, here you've got the plain yellow line. You have intracontinental exports, agricultural exports of SADC countries. And the same color but dotted line, you have intra-SADC agricultural exports. So it means that most of the intracontinental exports of SADC countries are within the SADC. And of course, it means that the trading costs are lower within REX, regional economic community, and there is more trading costs, higher trading costs between regional economic communities. We did some simulations of the AfCFTA. The problems I mentioned is the fact that if you want to have a very positive trade reform, it must be based on trade with countries for which the trade is already very large. It is not the case. So here we have access to foreign markets the impact of the African continental free trade area scenarios on access to foreign markets. So on the left, this is the complete liberalizations of tariffs. And you see the variations, it's the improvement in terms of access to foreign markets for African countries. So it is relatively small. So it will not improve by a big extent the access to foreign market, this reform, because most of the exports of Africa are going to non-African countries. So, but there will be an increase, an improvement of access to foreign market. The problem is that here we have implemented the realistic scenario of the African continental free trade area, and it is smaller than the complete liberalizations. And the reason is sensitive products. Because of sensitive products, the tariff liberalizations will not be complete, and it will have an impact on the consequences of the trade reform. Here we did some estimations in 2035 of the impact of this trade reform. We think that if the trade reform is only on tariffs and a little bit on non-tariff barriers, we may have some losers from the reform. And this is because today, some countries may have a good access to specific destination and they will be competed by new countries in this destination. But for Morocco, for SACU, we will have a successful tariff reforms, but not by very much. At least it should address the issue of non-tariff barriers. It is very clear in the case of Morocco, if there is not only tariff liberalizations, but also liberalizations of non-tariff barriers, the impact on real income may be around 1%. So we didn't here model the reform on services, and we didn't do a reform on transportation infrastructure, communication infrastructure, and efficiency of custom procedure. So my point is the fact that trading costs are still high in Africa. The trade reform, the African continental free trade area can stimulate regional value chain and agro-food processing, but this reform must be ambitious. It must not only address tariffs. It's a pity that there are some sensitive products. It must also address non-tariff barriers, but also tariff transportation infrastructure and communication infrastructure must be improved. And also, this reform must address the efficiency of custom procedure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Antoine, for that informative presentation, which has highlighted a number of things that are affecting intra-Africa trade. We have learned that there are high trading costs from the African continent. We have learned that much as there are issues with high tariffs in Africa, but there's also an issue that needs to be attended, which is technical barriers to trade and other non-tariff barriers such as sanitary and phytosanitary measures. We have also learned that as we address these issues, it looks like there is high intra-regional trade due to low trading costs within the regions. And we've learned that the AfCFTA is a game changer. However, we need to address other issues that are related to trade, such as infrastructure problems in Africa. Thank you for that, Antoine. I now wish to invite the next speaker for this session, Professor Mpandeli, who's going to talk about water resources for the agricultural sector, as well as climate change in the agricultural sector.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I really appreciate that. My My presentation is about transformation in agriculture water management from disciplinary to transdisciplinary perspective. And this is based on the work that we are doing across the African continent. And as the program coordinator highlighted, or director highlighted, I'm Sylvester Mbandeli from the Water Research Commission based in Pretoria, South Africa. This slide talks about, the high level of poverty, and we know that, poverty is one of the three big monsters that we are facing within the African continent. Other big monster that we are facing is high unemployment rate and also inequality. And we all know that, 56 million people are malnourished in the within the continent. And as a result of that, we have got the responsibility to make sure that, we produce sufficient enough food, but also food with high nutritional value. So as a result of that, 80% of the farmland in sub-Saharan Africa is managed by smallholder farmers. And we know that, majority of those smallholder farmers are based in rural areas. They produce bulk of our food, and they are threatened by high climatic variability, extreme climatic events, and also climate change. The other issue that I would also like to highlight on this slide is the fact that 95% of our agriculture is rain-fed. Therefore, we are, the agriculture sector or any other climate sensitive sector is threatened by recurrent drought, floods, and climate variability and change. And we have got the responsibility to make sure that we increase the potential to for irrigation and improve agriculture water management practices. Land and water and environment, it's also a constraint. You will see later on during my presentation that from the Water Research Commission perspective, we are driving issues related to water, energy, food nexus, and also circular economy. Africa is in the face of climate change, and majority of us, we are well aware about the fact that, Africa is the most vulnerable continent due to climate change, challenges. And as a result of that, we are well known as a continent that has got low adaptive capacity. And this is also worsened by legacy of socio-political issues. I've already indicated that unemployment, inequality, poverty, and governance, human and country level capacity needs to be jacked up in order for us to be able to address some of the socio-economic issues that we are facing on the continent. The climate change adaptation and mitigation policies framed at the national scale, policy scale disconnect between national and versus household. We need to make sure that we drive our activities within all the climate sensitive sectors in a nexus or in an integrated way. The last point is the policy-led consideration of interlinked issues. We have witnessed that sectors such as agriculture, water, energy, biodiversity have got a tendency to operate in a silo, and we want to break that silo mentality in order for us to be able to mobilize resources as sectors. And we also have got the responsibility to make sure that all this sector, your water, your agriculture, they are speaking with one voice, they are singing from the same page in order for us to address issues related to poverty, inequality, social cohesion, and culture. Agriculture, health, and food policy mismatch. As I've already highlighted the fact that one of the flagship programs that we're driving at the Water Research Commission is what we call Water, Energy, Food Nexus Lighthouse or flagship program. Our idea is to make sure that we drive our activities in a nexus way. We also need to make sure that we create interlink trade-offs, synergies among those sectors, but also making sure that we address the science policy interface as an organization. And as a knowledge generation organization, we also have got the responsibility to make sure that we produce knowledge that is addressing issues on the ground, not only for the South African public, but for Africa and and also other regions across the globe, which means that the knowledge that we are generating as an organization needs to be transferable to other regions across the globe. And as a result of that, we have got the responsibility to make sure that the science policy interface is at the forefront of each and every project that we are managing or driving as an organization. We also need to embrace, I mean, the collaborative processes in order for us to make sure that stakeholders in policy governance can co-design, co-produce pathway to tackle these integrable, I mean, societal challenges. The good thing is that Water Research Commission is also benchmarking its research and development and innovation ideas or agenda against, I mean, what is happening across the globe. And that is why part of our activities on water, energy, food, and exhaust, we are embracing the Sustainable Development Agenda, which means that, I mean, goals number 2, goals number 6, goals number 7 are critical for us to be able to derive our activities. And we are saying majority of strategies are externally driven solution focusing on economic development. But over and above that, we also have got responsibility to, by not making sure that they respond to local circumstances and often exclude the social and environmental dimension. We all know that, I mean, agriculture is still on the decline, and we need to make sure that, I mean, we shouldn't, I mean, keep on promoting the linear approach or the linear development, but that do not fully consider the trade-offs across sectors, the interlinkages, the synergies, and so on. Issues related to ecosystem service is very, very important. So social, political system, economy, and governance, in order for us to be able to manage our natural resources in a very sustainable and sufficient way, we also have got the responsibility to make sure that we align our national agenda with activities that are taking place at regional level, activities that are taking at continental level, activities that are taking place at global level. I've already highlighted the fact that, I mean, climate resilient agriculture is also one of the themes that we are working on. And we also have got the responsibility to make sure that we use our water resources in a very, very efficient and effective way. Therefore, we have got the responsibility to make sure that issues related to agriculture, water management, biodiversity, and people are factored as part of our core business. I mean, when it comes to research and development agenda. And we are always arguing that in order for us to assist smallholder farmers to be able to produce sufficient food, we have got the responsibility to make sure that, I mean, we provide, I mean, climate advisory information well in advance, and also to jack up our early warning system in order for this farming community to be able to take strategic decisions before any planting season or period. We are highlighting various, I mean, activities that can also be interlinked and make sure that we derive the transdisciplinary project across all our key strategic areas. I've already highlighted the water, food, nutrition, health and exhaust. What we have found so far, and we have done a lot of knowledge dissemination through scientific publication, book chapters, conference presentation, webinars, seminars, and so on. The large gaps exist between food supply and nutrition requirements. And our argument is that, I mean, we need water for food so that, I mean, water is used for agriculture and crop productivity. And we also need water for nutrition and health. Therefore, water, energy, food needs to be driven, I mean, in an holistic or in an integrated way. We also have got the responsibility to make sure that, I mean, we take care of our natural resources, especially issues related to biodiversity. Now we have added another component, which is health. For us, we have got the responsibility to make sure that we feed our population, we feed our people with high quality food. And therefore, we need to diversify our farming activities in order to minimize the risk, or in order for us to be able to deal with any natural vagaries that we are facing. I've highlighted about issues related to high climatic variability and change. And for us, we are saying we are forced to drive our activities in an integrated manner. I mean, across the African continent, based on various reasons. One of the reasons is the fact that, I mean, the growing population. And the other issue is the fact that, I mean, people are migrating from rural to urban areas, which means that the infrastructure that is meant to cater people in the urban areas, it's not gonna cope as time progresses. And the fact that, I mean, for example, in South Africa, we have accepted the fact that, I mean, we form part of the global community. We have got the responsibility to make sure that whatever agenda that is being developed, I mean, at international level, we need to embrace that so that, I mean, we are not left behind. The changing climate is a big issue. We know that, I mean, climate sensitive sectors are highly affected, the land use and limitation, obesity and undernutrition, a big issue for us as Water Research Commission. That is why we are also addressing issues related to food security, nutrition and health. And over and above that, these issues are also factored into the Sustainable Development Goals 2 and 3, and also highlighted in other SDG programs. Another issue that, I mean, we are also trying to do, and we are doing this with our key strategic partners. For some of you who are not aware that, I mean, Water Research Commission is a funding agent. We fund universities, science council, private sectors, NGOs, and so on. Another issue that we are also driving, I mean, which forms a part of the fourth industrial revolution, is the digitalization in agriculture. And we are doing this with specific people. One is to make sure that, I mean, we empower youth and women within our system. And we also have got the responsibility to make sure that, I mean, we embrace advanced technology within the irrigation sector. Issues related to improve water use efficiency and also reducing water use, I mean, wastage is very, very important. For example, South Africa agriculture sector utilizes 62% of our water resources. And as you are aware that, I mean, if you look at our annual average rainfall, we're talking about between, I mean, 440 to 860 millimeter per annum, which is lower compared to the global, I mean, average figures. We are saying we need to embrace precision agriculture. We need to measure and respond to a spatial and temporal variability of soil and crop growth, and also to enhance profitability and reduce environmental impact. There are various technologies that we're embracing as an organization, and also with our key strategic partners, your Geographic Information System, or GIS, navigation, I mean, global navigation system, satellite. We are doing this in order to monitor yield. We are doing this in order for us to move away from traditional system. The need for transformational change and nexus planning. I like this. Since this water, energy, food nexus story started, I mean, in 2011, it was also due to the fact that, I mean, heads of, I mean, states met in Bonn in Germany, and they agreed that we cannot continue with the business as usual, wherein various sectors like agriculture, water, forestry, they are operating in a silo and they're not communicating with one voice. Let us come up with an integrated program that will embrace all these three sectors. And again, it was just, I mean, based on the reasons that I've articulated. Yeah, population increases, rapid urbanization, resource depletion, agriculture expansion, and then climate change issues. And we are saying, in order for us to be able to stimulate the agriculture sector, within the African continent, we need to do cross-sectoral management, qualitative, relationship in resource management, and also account for synergies, trade-offs, and also inclusive growth. Over and above that, we need to embrace the sustainable development goals. And I'm happy considering the fact that, most of the projects that are taking place across the African continent are multidisciplinary projects, addressing socioeconomic issues and also the biophysical aspect.
Can you try to wrap up?
I'm trying to wrap up. I'm gonna be quick. I'm just sort of trying to show you the linear and monocentric approaches and the secular polycentric philosophy that we're embracing as an organization. The information is there on the slide. And this slide is very, very important for me. The post-COVID-19, how do we prepare and get ready? For us, we are saying we need to redefine the new normal. And then the most important thing is to make sure that accessing the resource base and also addressing the nexus approach, leveraging the fourth industrial revolution. And we also need to change our behavior, inclusive policy development, and also scrutinize granular high frequency data and anticipated patterns to reduce friction among sectors. Again, I'm not going to repeat this. The whole idea is to address the three big monsters that I've highlighted, but we also need to make sure that we create an enabling policy and institutional environment. Nexus and circular economies, these are the benefits and the reason why we are doing this. The science policy interface I've already articulated, because the knowledge that we are generating is based on the fact that we are getting funding from the South African public. And we need to make sure that, the community of practice are communicating with the policymakers so that at the end of the day, when they create or implement those policies, there's a clear understanding. And the policy needs to have targets, timelines, and systems. Empowering communities, this is self-explanatory. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. This slide, it talks about the circular economy, the water, energy, food nexus, a sustainable, resilient, and equitable food system. These are all the activities that we are driving as an organization. And we are happy because these activities are producing positive results. For us, this is my last slide, Chair, and I would appreciate if you can just give me 1.5 minutes just to highlight the fact that, as Africans and as Africa, we have got the responsibility to make sure that increasing hunger, poverty call for different approaches to secure food and nutrition for all. We cannot keep on relying on an international donor. We also have got the responsibility to make sure that as Africans, we develop our own research and development and innovation agenda that will address issues related to hunger, poverty, and so on. And I'm not saying, we shouldn't accept international assistance, but it's also very important for us to make sure that, when those programs come to an end, we sustain our activities. Africa needs fair and equitable partnership with the research, education, extension, and private sector. And the last point is that this includes the contribution of Africa agro biodiversity and indigenous knowledge to food security, after that income generation and agriculture diversification and social cohesion. Chair, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I know I have got several slides, but I wanted to share with you the philosophy behind the water, energy, food nexus and the circular economy, and the fact that we need to drive our research and development and innovation in a sustainable manner, but also appreciating or accepting the multidisciplinary approach that we're driving with our key strategic partner. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Pandeli. A very insightful presentation indeed. Some of the issues that we are outlining suggest that we need to have our solutions, African solutions to African problems. Another issue that is coming up prominently is the integrated approach that puts all the relevant stakeholders as we plan and develop our own policies to address these issues. Once more, thank you, Prof. I now want to invite the last speaker for this session, Dr. Ezirigwe, who's going to talk about land policies for Africa that enhance agricultural transformation. Over to you, Dr. Ezirigwe.
My name is Jane Ezirigwe, and I'd like to share my slide. Can you see my slide now?
Yes, I can see your slide, Doc.
Okay, I'm trying to move it to slideshow. Okay, I think I'll start with this. So, good afternoon, everybody. I assume it's afternoon everywhere. I'll be taking us through the topic, land policy framework as an enabler for Africa's agricultural structural transformation. I'd like to put some context to the discussions I will be making this afternoon. I would like to define what structural transformation is. And it is the transition from low productivity and labor-intensive economic activities to higher productivity and skill-intensive activities. So to put some context, I'll be discussing how land policy frameworks in Africa will help Africa to transition from low productivity and labor-intensive agricultural activities to higher productivity and skill-intensive agricultural activities. And by way of introduction, I'd like to let us know that Africa has a lot of arable land, but we still import a lot of food. So what that means is that we are underutilizing our land. And this becomes interesting when we note that about 80% of the population still rely on agriculture for their livelihood. The question becomes, how do we link productive land to the value chain in the agricultural sector? Before we move on, I'd like us to take a look at what is happening in terms of the land framework policies around Africa. And I'd like to note that there are nuanced differences in the regions. So while we look at Southern Africa and see that land ownership inequalities may be more pronounced there, we see that unsustainable patterns of land use may be more pronounced in Western Africa. But generally, looking around Africa, we see some of these issues and we highlight them as follows. Land ownership inequality, and this comes in different forms. Majorly seeing minorities controlling the vast parcels of land, while majorities are in the lack. So in places like South Africa and Zimbabwe, for example, we see the whites controlling most of the land. In South Africa, over 75% of the land is controlled by the white minorities, while the blacks are left out. In Zimbabwe, we see the same thing. And then it also comes in form of gender discrimination. So across the communities in Africa, we see that women are discriminated upon when it comes to access and ownership of land. And in some communities, we see it as far as a woman not being able to either access land or dispose land without the authority and permission of the head of the family, who most times, in almost all the cases, are men. It could be a male relative. And this point is important because we know very well that ownership of land is tied to how people are able to access credit and develop themselves and expand their businesses. Another issue we see around Africa is poor land governance. And this comes in different forms. We see land grabbing in countries like Kenya, Tanzania, and even in Ethiopia. So the issue with land grabbing is that there is a lot of displacement with land grabbing. There is compensation issues, and usually the local communities are not well consulted. So while we would like large-scale agriculture, investment in agriculture, we would also like to see it being done in partnership with the local communities. But presently, there is poor land governance in this area. We also see inefficient land administration in countries like Nigeria, where you have complicated land registration procedures. And these cause delays and sometimes even corruption in the system. And in all, we see that poor land governance results in conflicts. We have also seen issues of unsustainable patterns of use in West Africa. So we see the policy framework on land in West Africa supporting a practice like nomadic pastoralism. And we see that it is not a very compatible, it's not very compatible with other land use in the 21st century, and this has resulted in conflict. We also see poor linkages between urban and rural lands, and this has limited market integration efforts. So this is a situational analysis we see when we look at the land frameworks around Africa. But what must we consider if we want land policy frameworks that are going to lead to structural transformation in the agricultural sector? We must consider big investors and smallholder farmers. So we want large-scale agricultural investments. We want investors to come and invest in the agricultural sector, but we must do this in partnership with smallholder farmers. We must do this in partnership with local communities, and we must do it bearing our societal realities, where about 80% of farmers in Africa are smallholder farmers. We must also look at the issue of inclusivity. We must make sure that we make land accessible to women and the youth. So these unwritten rules where you see a woman needing permission before she can either access land, sometimes even to harvest on her land, on her farmland, we must discourage that. We must also look at issues on environmental protection, and we must make sure that we try to align land use to agricultural technologies. So we must make sure that the land policy frameworks are going to support new agricultural technologies like genetic engineering, precision farming, and intensive livestock production. In making sure that there is access to farmland, we must also make sure that there is access to industrial land, because if we want structural transformation in the agricultural sector, we must also encourage manufacturing and processing companies to also have access to land and expand their businesses. When we talk about agriculture, most times we see agriculture as a production of food products, but we must also start seeing agriculture and supporting agriculture to produce raw materials that can be used for food production. That is a sure way of moving the agricultural sector to structural transformative activities. We must also look at the frictionless trade and movement between urban and rural economies. And on this, we need to build good road networks to connect these economies, because we know that most arable land are in the rural economies, and if we need to access them, we need good road networks. Again, we must make sure that we look at the bilateral investment treaties that our governments sign, because some of them can limit the possibility of adjusting our policy frameworks on land. I'd like to go on and make some recommendations. First, I would advise that we adopt a people-centered development approach. And this must be consistent with ecological, economic, and social realities. Therefore, the land policies must make sure that they support new agricultural technologies and intensive livestock production. They should also promote investments both by and with smallholder farmers. I encourage partnerships and long leases as against outright sales. I want to say that when we promote these investments that we're talking about, we must be mindful not to leave large acres of land in the hands of few people. We must make sure that there is some kind of partnership between the smallholder farmers and these big investors, so that we avoid cases where, for example, in Kenya, about 1 million acres of rural land is being controlled by only 3 powerful political families, and that's leaving out about more than 11 million Kenyans without access to land. We must also make sure that there is an inclusive access to land for women, for the youth, and for the Blacks. We must safeguard against dispossession of legitimate tenure rights holders and minimize environmental damage. I'd like to go on to say that we can adopt using tax to discourage ownership of large acres of land. So we can use tax to, we can tax unused land above a certain threshold so that we discourage people from keeping it. For example, in South Africa, where you have more than 80% of the land being held by white minorities, if we tax these unused lands, it may make them release some of this land for use by others for the agricultural sector. Again, I had said that our BITs we have to be very careful when we're making them in order not to tie our hands from adjusting our land policy frameworks in the future. During land planning, we must make sure that there are kind of linkages between designated farmlands and industrial lands in order to encourage agro-processing activities. I also like to recommend the voluntary guidelines on governance of land and other natural resources by the federal FAO. It has a detailed right-based approach to human rights-based approach to land governance, and the African authorities can benefit from adjusting their land frameworks with that guideline. I'd like to conclude by saying that the COVID-19 has decreased global trade in food and agricultural goods, and this has affected both the way African countries export and import food. But then the AfCFTA can trigger trade-led industrialization and opportunities for participation in regional agricultural value chains. Therefore, the focus of the sector should be to optimize land use for integrated production and manufacturing of agricultural products. And by optimal usage, we want it to be inclusive, to be strategic, to be proactive, to be sustainable, given our societal realities. I'll be happy to take any questions on these and any other questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doc, for a very stimulating presentation. I like the fact that you have lifted the issue of the differences in the regions, that there is no one land policy that suits the regions of Africa in the same way. You've also lifted up the issues of discrimination of women towards the access of land, issues of poor land governance leading to land grabbing and displacement of the indigenous people. You have also given us specific considerations as well as recommendations that we can look at as we engage further on this topic of land management in Africa. This brings us towards the end of this first session. I have a few questions that are in the chat, in the Q&A. And I also want to invite participants to raise questions. This is the time for raising questions. And the questions that are in the chat room are directed to Antoine and to Dr. Ezerigwe. I have noted one hand. Maybe let me take that hand so that the responses come to all the questions. I've got a hand from Komla BC. Komla, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Vutula. It's my pleasure to reconnect with you again. And I'm glad that we continue to have a common point to support the African Agriculture Transformation Agenda. I'm speaking this morning from the AfCFTA Secretariat. I serve here as a senior advisor to the Secretary General on Agriculture, Trade, and Related Value Chains Development. First of all, I must mention and also appreciate the Nelson Mandela Institute for your support to the AfCFTA process, and more specifically to the agriculture agenda. I will be happy to follow up with you post this consultation to see how best we can continue to collaborate in supporting the AfCFTA process. Just a few reactions from my side. One to Antoine. Antoine, I noticed you mentioned about the competitiveness of some specific traditional African commodities in the international market, mainly such as coffee, cocoa, that are traded originally or traditionally in the raw forms. I want to know whether you also look at our potentials and how competitive we could be if we begin to add value to some of these commodities within the global arena, as is being the trend of our transformative agenda currently, and also specifically to the context of this, the topic for this discussion. I want to know whether you have looked at, or you intend also to look at, how competitive we will be, for example, if we begin to add extensive value to our cocoa against the Swiss cocoa processing initiatives. I would like your thoughts on this. Then my second reaction is to our colleague, the last speaker, just with regard to the issue of land and related reactions. One, I noticed that it's common on our development platforms to mention the discriminative way women are treated when it comes to land, access to land. But I would have wished that the speaker also guide us on what actually caused some of these discriminations. Because, for example, Ghana, here where I am from, it is easy for a woman to take money and buy land if you have. But when there is a family land, family lands are not entrusted to the hands of women because of our nature of inheritance, which is linked to patrilineal inheritance. Because it's assumed that when a lady takes over a family land and goes to marry from another family, the title then passes on to this family when this lady passes on. So this kind of conflict, it would be great to have some inside understanding whether this is the trend across the continent or these are isolated cases, so that we can be able to begin to figure out what sort of policy directions we could be providing to our policymakers. Thank you.
Thanks, Komla, for that question. Can you please drop your hand, Komla? I don't see any other request for the floor. So I'm going to ask the two panelists to respond. First, Prof. Bowe to respond to the question that's in the chat room, as well as the question that was raised by Komla. And then I will ask Doc Ezirigwe to respond to one question in the Q&A, as well as the question that was raised by Komla. In responding, distinguished panelists, please be mindful of time. We have to be starting the next session, which is on regional value chains, in the next few minutes. Thank you.
Do you want me to start?
Yes, please, Prof.
Okay, thank you. So I will try to respond quickly. So the question from Komla. Yes, hi Komla. I'm really enjoying to see you. So this is, yeah, we are doing a chapter in the next report that will be released early September in 2022 on traditional, on coffee, cocoa, and tea, what we call the stimulants products. So I think part of the response will be in this report. And I think we do not have, I do not have today an evaluation because the work is in progress, but we are exactly addressing this issue. And I think that the response is yes, there is a large potential, and in particular concerning coffee, because cocoa, excuse me, because concerning cocoa, I think that technically it makes more sense to invest in agro-processing in cocoa in Africa than in other stimulants. So I invite you to read the next report that will be released early September, and we have specialists of this type of issue. And I think that this will be an interesting contribution to the questions that you have raised. The other questions in the chat concerns NTBs, and it's true that NTBs can be politically motivated for protectionist reasons. And so this is the reason why NTBs are difficult to analyze, because they can be adopted for legitimate reasons like the protections of consumer, of the health of consumer or the environment. So is there a political smart way to address this issue? If I had a good answer to that, I would be a kind of wizard or magician, because it's a very difficult question. A politically smart way of addressing this issue, it's like all issues, it's very difficult. I think that in the process of reforming NTBs, there are several ways that have been adopted in the past by trade reform. And I think that, for example, harmonization or mutual recognition of standards, I think the best way is mutual recognitions of standards. And the reason is that the process of harmonizations is very complicated, because countries have a different culture, they have different values, and it's difficult to harmonize standards which include some cultural values. I would like also to respond that the fact that IFPRI is not only a technical institution, we are doing some research on for example, statistics. Today, for example, we work on informal trade in West Africa, and also bribes that are obtained by gendarmerie, police, customs official, and we estimate the magnitudes of these bribes, the amount of these bribes, and this is bribes that are perceived on transporter of shipments. And what we do also is not only to make some communication in terms of discussion paper, blogs about that, but we also share the product of this research with government officials in Western Africa. So we are not only a technical institutions, we are doing some communications and put some political pressure in order to obtain reforms. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Can I ask Dr. Ezerigwe to respond to the two questions? One, the one that was raised by Gomla, then the other one on the chat room.
That's fine. I'll try and be very quick. So I understand the question about Ghana is usually a unique one. Ghana is a unique, we all know Ghana even practices matriarchal inheritance and all of that. But the point remains that in majority of African communities, women are actually limited when it comes to not just ownership of land, like you said, even accessing this land. I come from Nigeria. It's a big issue in Nigeria. Women can, in some parts of Nigeria, women cannot even harvest on the lands they have farmed on without permission from their male relatives. So yes, it's a trend across Africa. And when it comes to the land distribution in Zimbabwe, which started since 1980, we all know where that has led to a lot of violence and conflict, and it hasn't delivered on the promises. So yes, while there have been progress made in redistributing land to the natives and rural communities, we haven't gotten there when it comes to equality on land ownership. Thank you.
Thank you, Doc. I'm going to ask that we respond to the other questions in the chat room by posting them in the chat room. There's that have just seen on financial skills and infrastructure gaps and how they affect industrial transformation in Africa. And this brings us to the end of this session. I am now going to invite Dr. Nyoni, who will be moderating the next session, the session that will be dealing with value chains. Dr. Nyoni is a capacity strengthening manager at Food, Agriculture and Natural Resource Policy Analysis Network. He works on focusing on development and designing implementation under food, agriculture and natural resources sector. He has experience in organizing, convening and facilitating several high-level, regional, national and national dialogues in agriculture and natural resources to address performance gaps against CAADP Malabo commitments. Over to you, Dr. Nyoni.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vutula. Very interesting discussion so far regarding what the competitive advantages that we have, the gaps that we have in the continent when it comes to intra-regional trade. So there's some interesting insights on the performance of the continent so far. A number of intriguing statistics have been provided there, and thought-provoking insights as well in terms of the land issues that we need to confront so that we are able to transition to the space where we want to be at. And as we may be aware, some of us are contributing to the processes already on the CAADP Malabo commitments. We are measuring the performance of the country's intra-regional trade, intra-Africa trade. And the report that was recently launched on the 10th of March shows that only 4 out of 51 countries that reported in the binary review processes are on track to achieving the CAADP Malabo commitments by 2025. Of course, we've got the Agenda 2063, the targets that we are building towards, and but this measuring, looking at how our performance is at this point is very critical because this is the efforts that we put in now that are able to get us to the desired outcomes. So there's a lot to be desired in terms of the performance of the continent, and it's great that we are already talking about the regional value chains, considering the regional value chains, unpacking them and trying to understand how these regional value chains can stimulate or facilitate the achievement of our intra-Africa trade priorities or targets. So with that said, and as introduced or highlighted by Dr. Vutula, so we want to now delve deep into the issues at hand. We want to delve deep into the regional value chains and to look at a few case studies within the continent and try to understand them. And we've got 4 key value chains that we have picked out to discuss in different parts of the continent. We've got the cassava regional value chain in the continent, but mostly in the West African region. We've got the leather production value chain in East Africa. We will also look at the soy regional value chain in Southern Africa. And we've got cotton textiles regional value chain that will be delivered by Dr. Lindsay. So great. Maybe just to start off with highlighting who is who in the room. Probably got this information, but just to quickly say that we've got, so to kickstart the conversation here, it will be Dr. Abiyodan, who is an expert with over 20 years experience in international development, and his expertise focuses on strategy development and human resource management, with primary focus on performance improvement services, delivering exceptional business solutions to both government and international agencies. So as we'll start with Dr. Abiodun, and then we will get to Mayor Jennifer Gashe, hope I pronounced that right, who is a regional expert on industrialization for the East African community. So she is working for the GFA, a consulting group, which works with GIZ, supporting implementation of they call it the support to the East African market-oriented, people-centered integration process in the EAC community. And she's passionate about increasing East African community regional trade for promoting value addition, development of micro, small, medium enterprises, and engagement of private sector in the region. Then we will have Grace, Miss Grace Nsomba from the University of Johannesburg, who will also take us through regional value chains from her perspective there. But she's got, Grace is a researcher at the Center of Competition, Regulation and Economic Development, housed at the University of Johannesburg. She holds a Master's of Commerce in Competition and Economic Regulation from UJ, and has experience in the field of competition, economic regulation, and industrial development. So she is focused on this area. She has done research there. And we finally have Professor Lindsay Whitfield from the University of Denmark. She's also part of the Center for Business and Development Studies. So Prof. Lindsay is in the department. She's a political economist whose research focuses on contemporary challenges to economic development. Prof. Whitfield research combines theories within development economics with the political science and in economic history, and emphasizes how processes of economic and development take place within and cannot be understood separate from the global economy. Okay, great. Thank you very much for projecting that. Now, going to our first presentation, the cassava regional value chain. Dr. Abiodun, over to you, sir.
My name is Abiodun Hebuzo, and I want to thank the Nelson Mandela School for the opportunity. It's an exciting opportunity to speak to the issues of African unity and African development. I'll be focusing on cassava value chain and putting it into the structural transformation of Africa. I'll be looking directly into the need for implementation as it affects to African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Next slide, please. Next slide. Can you hear me? Good. Yes, this is just to make it very good. Thank you very much. This is the content, and then we're looking at the background from NEPA to AfCFTA. Then we speak straight into the cassava value chain production and the principles. Then how do we transform agriculture? How do you transform Africa in terms of cassava value chain? And then we summarize with some conclusion, the lessons we've learned and the next steps. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. We will be looking at it from the fact that African Continental Free Trade as truly a free trade area that began in January 2021. However, I began to look into the issues of African development plans. You can recall the Lagos Plan of Action, the Moravian Act Plan, the African Alternative Framework, as well as the Program for Socio-Economic Recovery and Transformation, 1999. And the African Charter for Popular Participation. I'm sure some of the earlier presenters will have touched on this. However, NEPAD NEPAD and AfCFTA are the newest tools to arrest the shortcomings and failures of previous plans to make the continent strong and to re-engage the goals of development and integration. NEPAD as a special tool primarily targets on poverty eradication and socioeconomic development, and looked at entrenchment and instrumentalization of democracy to ensure good governance. However, what people might not know that there was a NEPAD initiative on Africa, and that NEPAD initiative on Africa began in November 2005. NEPAD came up with the Pan-African Cassava Initiative. That mandate was to coordinate cassava development and promote the crop as a poverty fighter across Africa. And the acronym for that is IMPACY. IMPACY's strategy was on markets, improve organizations of producers, increase in private sector investment across the cassava value chain. So this presentation speaks to the need to prioritize cassava with focus on accessibility, availability, and affordability of cassava inputs towards that regard. Next slide, please. I will be bringing practical examples to these, and I will speed up in terms of this conversation. The global trend on cassava value chain shows that cassava is actually the most important source of calories in the tropics after rice and cassava. It is also important to note that 50% of world cassava crop is cultivated in Africa, with over 6 million hectares. And Nigeria and Democratic Republic of Congo are the major producers. In fact, Nigeria is the world's largest producer of cassava, which by implication means Africa is the world's largest producer of cassava. Nearly 90% of cassava produced in sub-Saharan Africa is used for food. Take note that the Democratic Republic of Congo, cassava constitutes 44% of the total energy intake. However, in Latin America and in the Caribbean, human consumption accounts for 42%, and the remainder is used as animal feeds, starch, or other cassava derivatives. In practical terms, apart from this use as a staple food, either as fresh or processed animal feed, an estimated 25% of the global cassava production is used as feed ingredient for livestock, poultry, fish farming, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. Thank you. With the picture created at the background, you will see from this map that Africa is actually green. And Africa being green, cassava is one of the major reasons why Africa is green. And generally speaking, higher agricultural output implies an increased demand for upstream products such as fertilizers, seeds, pesticides, and machineries. However, factoring in higher upstream demand that downstream activities increase output and translate into an additional $275 billion in revenue, according to McKinsey. Looking at the picture as we present here, you will clearly notice that there are a large portion of greens and a significant amount of uncultivated cropland is available in Africa, and this can add close to 25% to Africa's GDP. I won't bore you with those details because I want to drive straight into how do we use cassava to industrialize Africa. What are the methodologies that we will use to get this done? And then how do we speak to the various value chains? So let us go to the next slide in this regard, please. Please, let's go to the next one. Those ones will, let's go to the next slide again. Next slide. Good. This is the, no, please go back, go back. Yes, this is the value chain of cassava globally. fresh cassava roots, dried cassava chips, cassava leaves. Under the dried cassava chips, there you have various cassava derivatives, and that is where we need to focus on. But take note that in Africa, cassava production is still a task for rural families with virtually no organized plantation. I want every one of us to pay attention to that fact. This is probably one of the main obstacles to building a sound cassava industry. The emphasis is there is the cassava industry. However, raw cassava supply from smallholder implies the need for a huge and solid logistics system. That is explaining the value chain there. The latter requires adequate and well-equipped storage and efficient transport network to connect the product through the production zones for aggregation and to maintain the product in good condition until it is processed to a more stable form. Speaking to the need for the industrialization of Africa. Let's move to the next slide.
Doc, as you're moving to the next slide, please adjust your camera and bring it down a bit. Yes, that's okay. Perfect. Yes, and you've got about 5 minutes left. Pull it up a bit.
Okay, please, can we just run down to slide 15 so that we could address key issues in this presentation quickly? It's loaded, and if I had been in control of this presentation, it would have been faster. Maybe if you run to slide 15, go down. Yes, let's leave here. This gives you a picture. Leave it here. Sorry, please, go back. Go back, please. Go back one more, please. One more, please. Yes. This gives you the picture of what is happening in Africa in terms of industrialization. The African Development Bank is working on special agricultural process, agribusiness industrial processing zone as their strategy to awakening Africa to industrialize cassava as a tool for economic reverberation of the Africa. Next slide, please. Next slide. This is a clear picture of the cassava production value chain from practice in Nigeria. Here are the major areas. The ones with sharp blue color, this is where the competition is. If you recall the earlier slide we shared about the global value chain. Now the white color areas are underdeveloped areas in the African cassava value chain. There is the one that is light and striped in color. These are the area that needs improvement. So you are looking at extension services, agri-input, and tractor hiring. You are looking at the area of cassava production. You are looking at trading. You are looking at cassava processing. You are looking at equipment. You are looking at packaging. You are looking at international sales. But this remains the major challenging area for Africa to focus on and develop cassava as a tool to poverty eradication and economic development. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide. Yes. So thank you so much. I think that's fine. One back. Go back, please. Yes. Especially a growing industrial processing zone is very, very key to the industrialization of Africa. Focus on the cassava value chain. This is a picture of what it is. SAPZ are designed to concentrate agro-processing activities within areas of high agricultural potentials. And we have already described this in our earlier presentation, if you can take time and go through it. They enable agricultural producers, processors, aggregators, and distributors to operate in one vicinity, reducing transaction costs and sharing business development services for increased productivity and competitiveness. So you can see the whole system as it operates within a special agro-industrial processing zone. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yes, this is a pictorial emphasis of what we have shared on. And then you look at the need. This is the end-to-end solution to agricultural value chain with focus on cassava, but it's generic in the sense that cassava is symbolic of what needs to be done in every other value chain across Africa. Next slide, please. So why do we have to use this method? SAPZ as the key and outcomes is that first and foremost, it enhances productivity. It reduces post-harvest losses. It reduces cost of operations. It increases value addition. Key outcomes here, if we adopt this methodology, that is the SAPZ, Special Agro-Industrial Processing Zone, along agricultural value chain with specific reference to cassava, it will give us this following outcome: reduce food imports, assure food security, nutrition at low and stable prices, boost revenue from agricultural exports, create wealth for rural farmers, create new sustainable jobs, enhance hope, boost rural livelihoods, revival of stranded public assets, both in public and private space. Please, next slide. Next slide. This is a Nigerian case study in Delta State where it has been applied and it is working. And you can see how this has evolved. The cottage industry came up, the microprocessing centers, the small and medium processors came up, large scale processors came up. And in Nigeria, this is a reality in Delta State. Let's go out to the next slide. This is a case study of the application of the SAPZ zone in Gambia, in Gabon. If you look at it from the supply side to the market side, it captures the whole value chain and then delve into the solutions that we provide through this direction. Let's move to the next slide. I think I'm running to make sure I touch the critical areas. So what do we understand in the global value chain? The global trend defined the big strategic imperative for reforms. Key things: accessibility, availability, and affordability. Access to inputs, availability of all resources, and affordability of these can be achieved if we use the instrument, the special vehicle of the SAPZ towards the development of or industrialization of cassava value chain. Next slide, please. So what are the lessons learned and what are the call for action? Clearly, there is capacity asymmetries. There is everywhere in Africa because it is not everywhere that these value chains are well developed. But the use of value chain help us to appropriately locate where the needs lie. For instance, comparing Nigeria and Congo, the two biggest countries that produce cassava, where do we find opportunities? If the landmass is more in Congo, do we concentrate efforts in production in Congo and then bring in processing in Nigeria? These are the questions we need to talk about. Or do we have specific localities in each of these countries where this methodology will be deployed to the development of the cassava value chain? Ease of doing business is an important thing. Every country, especially in Africa, now have joined the World Bank Ease of Doing Business competition, which unfortunately has come to an end. However, the truth is that ease of doing business need not be measured if it is working, because people give testimony that it. So African continental free trade as a vehicle for the improvement of Africa and in the industrialization of Africa should drive this policy reform by creating appropriate environment that is fundamental to attracting investment into the subsector. The next issue is the effective regulation. Where you don't have effective regulation, there will always be unethical practices. Take note that the donor fatigue exists, and donor fatigue exists because of poor regulatory environment. This is also important for us to consider. Economic reform. With potential investment opportunities across all sectors, economic reform is key towards what we want to do. Next slide. So what are the takeaway? For Africa and for the success of African Continental Free Trade Agreement, we need to think about the principle of alignment. The principle of co-creation requires that the diversity of stakeholders in Africa, especially in the cassava value chain, will come together. With alignment done, we need to think about renewal. We need to think about how we form a formidable team that will drive the industrialization of Africa. And one of the ways to do that is the development of special agriculture, agro-industrial processing zone across Africa. And the final aspect of it is execution. Like they said, the best of all strategy, the best of all works is on table. But when the tire hits the road, it is called the reality of execution. We need to execute well. We need to create alignment. We need to create renewals. And the team that we create to drive these realistic responses can help us track and trace and target in such a manner that we achieve our set goals. Once again, I just had to push this through. There are lots of slides I had just to jump to make sure we get to these next steps, which is primarily my focus. I think the industrialization of Africa using the value chain approach is important, and direct energy must be focused in using the special agro-industrial processing zone towards this. And we have tried to show that this is workable. There are signs that this can work in Africa based on the earlier things we have done within the sector in Nigeria. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Doc. Hang in there. We will be sharing questions. Colleagues, please, the chat platform is open for us to share our perspectives at the end of this discussion or the presentations that will be delivered. We will want to have a chat, address the questions that are there, but just to think about, Doc, the sustainability of the SAPZs, talking about funding, donor fatigue, how sustainable are they? What are the challenges there related to sustainability? So let's just keep that in mind as we get to the next part of our presentation. So please allow me to invite May Jennifer from the East African community to deliver her presentation. May, if you are ready, the platform is yours.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, moderator. And before I start, I just wish to recognize the Nelson Mandela Institute and the work they're doing, especially in the area of working on promotion of trade and industrial policy strategies, and also to congratulate the committee that was established recently, because I wish to say that at the moment, we still need a critical mass. We need more people who can advocate and talk about the area of industrialization in Africa as we move towards the free trade area. And then I will start by sharing my screen. And I also congratulate my other colleagues who have talked ahead of me. The first setting of the scene is very useful to the agricultural sector. So as I've been introduced, my name is Engineer Jennifer Gache. I've been working as an industrial development expert in the EAC region for the past 13 years. And at the EAC, we have worked on a number of value chains, specifically agro value chain, leather and leather products, cotton, textiles, fruits and vegetables, iron and steel value chain, automotive, and the extractive sector. So in case you still need anyone to talk about this, you can always get in touch with me, and I will always discuss some of our findings. And I will begin my presentation. And my presentation is so much focused on the East African community, but which comprises 6 countries, that is Burundi, Kenya, Rwanda, South Sudan, Uganda, and the United Republic of Tanzania. And at the EAC, we are we are in the process of admitting the Democratic Republic of Congo. And also allow me to say that at the EAC also, we've been working very closely with our colleagues from COMESA and also from the SADC area. So in a number of value chains, and including the one we've just had before, cassava has been found to also be one of the value chains that the partner states, all the member states share very closely. So the development of the leather sector has been prioritized at the top level, that is by the East African Community Heads of States. And one of their requirement was for us to put into place modalities that will lead to the development of a competitive domestic leather sector, to be able to provide affordable new quality leather products to reduce the importation of second-hand leather shoes and products, because in the EAC, we are importing a lot of second-hand goods in this area. So after that kind of directive, we did a background check on the sector, and at this point, allow me to say that at the Africa as a continent, as a third of all the global livestock. But when it comes to the trade, as a continent, we are only trading 10%, which is quite a shame. And yet, the leather sector has a lot of potential, because I believe even all of us where we are today, all of us wear shoes, and we also carry luggage, some made of leather, and the ladies, they carry handbags, and a number of people wear also leather garments. So there's a lot of potential in this area for all the African countries, and we need to find ways to improve value addition. So most of the countries in Africa, and specifically East Africa, are only doing primary processing. That is, they're converting the hides and skin into wet blue and selling this wet blue with only about 10% of its value. And then the other, it's only so 80 to 90% of the wet blue is exported, and only 10% remains for processing, which means that very little, we are not moving upwards the value chain. And we know that the value-added products are better, and which leaves us at a disadvantage. And currently, we are facing stiff competition from the Asian countries who are importing cheaper shoes. And also we have a lot of second-hand coming in from America and the European Union countries. So this kind of, for us to change the situation, we need strategic cooperation amongst our partner states. So, while we were working on what kind of strategies to put in place, we decided to tackle the value chain from the head up. And I mean, the first area we looked at is, just like my colleague in cassava has shared, we went into the end of the value chain, which is the livestock farming. And we looked at the amount of cattle in the region, and also the offtake rates. I mean, the leather value chain is closely linked up with the meat, because you'll find in most countries, meat is more valued than leather. So when the animals are slaughtered, the emphasis is put on deriving the meat, without a lot of care being taken to ensure that the leather that is derived from the livestock comes out in the best possible way. And we see that we've got an offtake rate of 18.5%, but remember, the population of Africa is growing. So even the population of our livestock is going to grow, and also the number of the animals that are being slaughtered. So it's a high time to make good use of this particular product. And when you look at the way slaughtering is done, there is the slaughtering that is done by family when they're having events. There's the village market slaughter, and there is the town slaughter in urban areas, and then there's the modern abattoirs. So you find that during all this slaughtering, there's a lot of wastage. Like when family slaughters, most likely they will throw away the hides and skin. In the village, there's 30% wasted. In the town, there's 15%, and in the modern abattoir, there's 10%. So once the animals is slaughtered, how is the hide collected. So you find that some systems have got more effective hide collection. Within the ESC, we found that there's 58 million units of hides and skins that are collected. And then when you move down the value chain, when these hides and skins are collected, there are various methods of preservation. One of the most popular one is salting, because salting enables the hide to be preserved so that it can be able to take a number of days. So you find that the value here is about 5% of the hides, which goes into the salting, and then the 95% of the value flows towards the processing into wet blue, which is most of the tanneries in the East African community are focusing on this area. And you find per year there is about 129 billion processed into wet blue. And then that's where most now, this area of wet blue is where you can say we are deriving most of our value, because most of it is exported now. Because you see, most of the countries that are finishing leather and making finished products, they prefer to get this product as wet blue so that they can finish it to their standards, to their own standards, because the process of finishing the leather also requires a lot in terms of technology and inputs. And sometimes the finished leather may not meet the required quality. In Africa, we've seen two countries right now, that is Ethiopia and Kenya. They're the countries that have got some kind of reasonable level of finishing, but Ethiopia is as the best. And I believe that most of the countries in East Africa, in fact, even us as East Africa, we aspire to learn quite a number of lessons about what is happening in Ethiopia. And that is where also the Africa Leather Institute is established. And I believe this center can do a lot in terms of helping us to improve this value chain. Then only 17% of what is left over goes into finished leather, which means that some of the tanneries are able to finish off the leather, and we will hardly export any finished leather because it is not made to very high standards, but we use it to make some shoes locally, some leather shoes, and some other products. And at least when the shoes are made, some of it is exported also within the region in that finished form. And there's some popular products like some leather canvas products, which sell even within other African countries like the SADC area. Then we have very few now coming into leather articles. And also this one, we make some leather articles and we are able to export some. Then we also have consumption. The local market consumes some of the leather products. So from our analysis of the leather sector, we can say that the economic importance of the industry has been modest, and it's you can actually say that it is on the decline. Because from a paltry 0.6% share of the agricultural GDP to 0.28% in 2017, this is quite a shame because we have quite a number of livestock. And the decline is attributed to several factors, including lack of diversified markets, and we don't have low product differentiation. And this is some of the reasons why you hear the talks about having these design centers that can enable more diversified products. So,
May Jennifer,
yes,
sorry, we're running a bit behind time, so
okay,
if you could start
just
wrapping up. Thanks.
Okay. All right. So, so basically, I think the rest of my presentation will still just gives the where we see value leaking, where we have continuous exports of wet blue, low quality, tanneries are underutilized, lack of affordable finance, poor collection system, limited availability, exponential demand, inadequate collaboration. So I talk about these areas of where challenges have been noted is where now we came up with the solutions, where solutions come in now. So I won't go into the technical details of the tackling of the value chain, but more so to say that maybe to talk about and also the strengths. These ones can be found in the presentation, but basically just to say that in tackling the value chain as a region now, we aspire to be a regionally and international competitive leather and leather products industry, and also to provide a conducive business environment for technology transfer, skills, knowledge sharing, and growth at all levels, and capture the intrinsic value of the leather, and to transform the leather sector to be able to provide, to supply the region and also the continent. And in making of our leather strategy, we have given some goals, some targets. So these targets are able to put all the plans into perspective. But basically, maybe just to wind up by talking about some of the broad objectives and to support the sector, modernize the animal husbandry, because a lot of the leather is affected at the stage of the animal husbandry, improve and modernize infrastructure to guarantee high quality hides and skin and preserve the raw material, to have more increased investment in integrated tannery and management of waste, and to develop the footwear manufacturing and also the leather manufacturing capacities, so that the region can be able to make more of leather goods, to work with the small scale footwear manufacturers so that they can raise the quality of their products, and to undertake skills development, and also to strengthen the governance, policy regulation system, and institutional coordination mechanism for a conducive business environment. So basically, all these things require proper coordination, and within the region, we are put in place coordination framework that to track the implementation of this value chain. So thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity to give the presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you for breaking it down and giving us the context and how important it is, and this value chain that we need to invest in high losses, high potential. There's a comment as well there regarding the consumption, competition from consumption. But we move to the next presentation from Grace. Grace, could you take the floor, please?
My name is Grace Nsomba, and I'm from the Center for Competition, Regulation, and Economic Development. I'll be presenting to you the role of regional value chains and food security and economic development, with a specific focus on production of soybean. Now, I focus specifically on soybean the production of soybean as a value chain into the processing of oil, that is cooking oil, as well as other edible oils, as well as animal feed as derived demand into the production of poultry, fish, and other livestock. The focus on the presentation is also on the East and Southern African region. So our motivation behind studying the soybean value chain is motivated by previous CRED work, upon which we've come to find over the last several years that small market participants are getting bad deals. And what we mean by this is that small farmers get too low prices for the crops that they produce, and then small processors in the context of value chains get charged too much for the grain that they procure. We also find that consumers are paying high prices, and this might sound familiar in the context of wheat and oil, even more recently, given the tensions that have arisen in Ukraine. Another issue that we've come across is that there's some serious concentration concerns in key industries within the Eastern Southern African region. And by this we mean in agricultural industries, for example, in poultry, in fish farming, but also in the production of animal feed and the procurement of grains at the trading level. So this, we've noted, brings forward a struggle for regional competition advocacy and enforcement. At the heart of it, a role to be played by institutions such as the East African Competition Authority, as well as the COMESA Competition Commission. So what we did in light of this is that in 2021, CRED, in partnership with the University of Johannesburg, launched what we call the African Market Observatory, which is aimed at recognizing or identifying whether prices of grain and other consumer products are fair and whether markets are working well for smaller market participants and smaller scale farmers. And through the African Market Observatory, we found that prices are typically volatile, particularly for maize and soybean, and that this has meant that there's need for more up-to-date information in order to guard against the market power that we find in key agricultural industries. We also note that East and Southern Africa remains a net food importer. Also, this has also been reiterated in the first session of this presentation. And we also find this, and we find that in key commodities, for example, in soybean, while there's good production in several regions within the continent, the East and Southern African region still remains a net food importer of foods that are derived from these commodities. So essentially what we say is that growth and inclusion are being undermined by a lack of competitive markets and also a lack of effective regulations. And this is not within national borders, but at a regional level. So we try to highlight this using this diagram that I show you here. And at the top here basically is a typical value chain within the agricultural space. But we find that within the value chain, there are few large traders with access to customer networks, storage facilities, but also knowledge of prices across time and place, which gives them the ability to be market makers. And these traders are also significantly linked to large processes upon which they are afforded high levels of information, but also high levels of bargaining power. And what this means is that they are afforded the ability to significantly increase the margins that they are able to earn. On the other hand, we have smaller agribusinesses and smaller farmers just outside of a specific value chain, who are trying to plug into these value chains, but are unable to do so significantly because there are some missing links, exclusion, as well as the exertion of market power by larger traders. What this then does is that it makes smaller producers and agribusinesses price market takers due to the poor information that they have, which puts them in a position of weak bargaining power. So in terms of production, we looked at various factors within the soybean value chain, and we looked at the production levels within the region. So this trend line here shows the production of South Africa between 2010 and 2020. And South Africa is a significantly large producer of soybean relative to the East and Southern African countries, such as Zambia, Malawi, and Tanzania. On the other hand, in terms of soybean and oilcake, South Africa is an importer, meaning that despite its increase in production over several years, it continues to remain a significant importer of soybean and oilcake. On the other hand, Malawi and Zambia are significant soybean exporters, and given the good fertility that they experience regarding the production of soybean, they have the ability to export to countries within the region, but also across outside Africa. But what this means is that cross-border markets need to work well. We also looked deeper into where Zambia and Malawi export to, and their main exporting destinations are actually Zimbabwe and Kenya, meaning that despite being the largest consumer, rather, or being the highest demand for soybean being South Africa, other African countries don't necessarily actually export to South Africa, which is a significant indicator that markets are not necessarily working well in terms of the trade of soybean. It is also important to note the role of climate change and its implications for production, trade, and regional integration, which has also been highlighted in the previous session. The world has more frequently been seeing climate-induced natural disasters, which shows that the climate crisis is not a problem for the future, but a current and urgent concern. A second year of drought is underway in South America, and the expectation is that food prices will remain elevated into 2022. This is also compounded by the current situation in Ukraine. In Africa, weather cycles are less predictable, and parts of the region have experienced unprecedented rainfall after a long dry spell. A good example of this is Malawi, where October of 2021 through to January of 2022 was one of the driest periods in the central region of the country since the year 1970. Tropical Storm Anna, which is the recent tropical storm in Malawi and surrounding countries, combined with rainfall deficits and constrained fertilizer supply, have sharply curbed production outlooks for 2022. Northern Kenya is also another example, which has also been experiencing a drought since September 2021. Heavy rains were expected in most parts of Southern Africa, but as we can see maps here, the severity of localized rainfall underscores the growing unpredictability of weather concerns. So I have to reiterate again that markets are generally not working well, and the issues around climate change significantly compound on this. What the Market Observatory has found is that there are significant variations in prices over geographies and over a short period of time in markets for soy specifically. We see that there are huge margins being earned between producing areas and consuming areas, and these are in excess of what we would expect efficient transport costs to be. This is actually both within and across borders. There have also been big shifts, partly due to supply shocks and regulatory barriers, which again also exacerbate the extent to which profit margins can be earned. An example of this is the export ban of soybean in Zambia in August 2021, which saw prices drop significantly in Zambia, but rise in surrounding regions. So this here is, yes?
If you could wrap up, please.
Sure. So basically what we find in soybean is that, and which is again critical for oil processing and animal feed, is that there's firstly big excess margins from supplying areas and buying areas. So for instance, Zambia and Malawi, Zambia here, prices are significantly low well into January 2022, but buying areas in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, for instance, are seeing significantly higher prices. We also see that price changes. There are significant price changes from the time of harvest. So for instance, in the case of Zambia and Malawi, that is in May and April of the preceding years, to later months where there's been excess profits of around $320 million within that year. So I'll finish off with this slide where we calculate the potential margins that were earned by traders within the region. I take, for example, between Lusaka and Nairobi in November and December of 2021. We calculated the efficient transport cost to be approximately $92 along that transport route. And that time, soybean was going for $448 per ton in Lusaka, but $797 per ton in Nairobi. Given this efficient transport cost that we calculate, a trader with that is plugged into value chains with sufficient information and access to storage and a custom network could therefore potentially earn $257 per ton in that period. The same is for Songea and Nairobi between Tanzania and Kenya, where traders potentially earned $438 per ton during that time. So we see here that there's value from more competitive markets and pricing information, but there's need for more enforcement and advocacy to address the trader issues in soybean, along with the transport issues that we see. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Grace. Colleagues as well, please keep sharing your comments and questions on the chat platform as we go to our last presentation that will be delivered by Lindsay. Lindsay, over to you.
So I was asked to talk about the cotton and textile regional value chain in the context of African industrialization strategies, with an idea of thinking how can we move away from exporting cotton, which is particularly the case in West African countries, to processing cotton for textile industries. I'm mostly going to talk about what can be done and not in what is, largely because there's not a lot of processing going on, mostly in Southern Africa around Mauritian textile firms importing cotton from Zimbabwe, Zambia, and South Africa. And there was an increasing amount of domestic processing in Ethiopia as they began to build a textile industry. But in general, there is not much processing of cotton into textile, although there are apparel sectors which largely import their textile. So the idea is, how can we make more integration between agro-processing and manufacturing in this value chain? So I'm going to talk about how could this be done also in the context of the Africa Free Trade Agreement. 2 points I want to make before I start is looking forward, we need to think about how to build integrated textile sectors in the context of the 21st century. I'm going to talk about what that means. And second, that I don't think we should think about regional value chain participation separately from global value chain participation. If we look historically at how countries have industrialized, especially in Asia, I think it's wrong to say that they built capabilities first in regional value chains and then entered global value chains. In fact, in many cases, it was either simultaneous or actually global market participation first. And why is that? It's because export markets allow you to access a larger demand, which is necessary to achieve the economies of scale in capital-intensive industries. But equally important, it's important to reach that level of international competitiveness by building up the capabilities required through accessing foreign knowledge and frontier technologies. And it's for that reason that I think we need to think in African countries in terms of building integrated textile industries that can supply domestic, regional, and global markets at the same time. And if we're going to do that, we need to understand global markets and we need to understand where they're going. And that is about the global fashion industry. And there are really important trends that are emerging right now in terms of the types of textiles demanded, current technological innovations, and moves towards sustainability. Now, fortunately, I think that this emerging sustainability shift in the global fashion industry creates windows of opportunities for African countries to pursue green industrialization strategies. And so in my very short presentation today, I'm going to talk about what that means in terms of developing textile industries in sub-Saharan Africa. So on this slide, I've tried to give you an idea of the first global trend, which is a move towards sustainability in what could be called the global fashion industry or global apparel, the apparel global value chain. And this comes from research that I've been doing following trends among apparel retailers and marketers, who are the main global buyers in US, European, and Japanese markets. If you follow debates about climate change and staying within planetary boundaries, we know that the global fashion industry is actually one of the biggest polluters. Depending on the numbers, you can see anywhere from 4, 6, 8, 10% of global greenhouse gases come from the whole global supply chain. Also, if you look at water pollution, the industry accounts for approximately 20% of water pollution. The chart that you see here is just a breakdown, and this is reports that have been done by McKinsey and other consultancy firms. It gives you a breakdown of how that looks across the global supply chain. So if we focus on raw material production, which is what we're interested in this seminar, raw material production of cotton and man-made fibers accounts for 38% of this overall greenhouse gas emissions. Most of that is synthetic because it's coming from oil, But cotton also accounts for a large part, and that's because of the pesticides and fertilizers involved, and also the extensive amount of water and energy involved. So as a result of this, one of the trends in the sustainability shift is largely focusing on how to change raw material that's being sourced. So there is definite clear interest in global apparel brands and retailers to reduce their climate impact in their global supply chains by changing the raw material base of clothing. This means this is being done in 4 different ways. One is to move towards organic agricultural practices in cotton. The second is to find alternative forms of natural fibers. The third is to move increasingly towards man-made cellulose fibers. And the third is to move altogether out of virgin materials and into recycled materials. And I'll just briefly comment on these 4 points. I think the one about organic cotton is extremely important for African countries and opens up a major opportunity. There was an article published recently in the New York Times on the 13th of February, which basically showed India is the largest single producer of the world's organic cotton supply. It accounts for over half of the organic cotton sold globally. And actually last year, the amount of organic cotton production in India grew by 48%. However, as shown in the research behind this article, most of this cotton is not actually organic, that there are major problems of fraud in the entire certification system in India. And because the New York Times published this article, which is called "That Organic Cotton T-shirt May Not Be as Organic as You Think," this is a huge reputational risk for buyers. And so what we're basically seeing is that buyer demand for organic cotton is very high, and that the actual supply globally is not anywhere close to meeting that demand. And that's also because obviously organic cotton has lower yields, and this makes it difficult for farmers to supply if other factors are not in place. The second point is that there's actually a move away from cotton, which is water intensive and energy intensive, to materials that use less energy in processes. And one of these that's been big among global apparel buyers is hemp, and particularly the mixing of hemp and cotton for jeans. And here I've just put a link to Levi's, but there are many other apparel brands which are trying to become more sustainable, who are experimenting with different forms of material, and hemp is one of them. And of course, hemp has huge possibilities in the African continent. The third point is the move away from purely natural to sort of man-made cellulose fibers. This is mostly modal and lyocell, which are semi-synthetic cellulose fibers made from types of wood. They form a kind of rayon that's more natural, and this substitutes for cotton and silk. The interesting thing here, and this is where we move towards just agriculture to developing intense manufacturing capabilities, is that the creation of cellulose is in itself a manufacturing process. It involves innovation and chemical processes, and these fibers are trademarked, like Tinacell. And increasingly, the few companies globally that make this, which is not just in Europe, but also includes some Indian companies, are moving towards closed loop production methods with more natural chemicals, so they can also call their process sustainable. And that means that buyers are seeking to use these kind of man-made cellulose fibers increasingly in their products to substitute for cotton and silk. And the third is the move away from virgin resources altogether to recycling. And this is being made possible by very recent developments in chemical recycling technologies, which replace mechanical ones. These investments include investments by major brands such as H&M, and they are actually, as we speak, being scaled, being used in some of their supplier firms in Bangladesh and Indonesia, trying to bring them to scale to see what this would look like. And the recent McKinsey Apparel's Chief Purchasing Officer survey shows that brands do intend to move away from virgin resources to recycled ones. 1 in 3 respondents said they plan for more than 90% of their product to be made with sustainable fibers, and 21% aim to replace at least 30% of their virgin cotton with recycled cotton by 2025. So when we think about how to create vertically integrated textile industries in African countries, we need to think outside the box. We need to stop thinking in terms of cotton. And if we're going to think in terms of cotton, we need to think in terms of organic cotton. But I would argue that we actually need to move away from cotton and think about alternative fibers and also about recycling fibers. The second global trend that will be important and that provides, I think, important windows of opportunity for African countries is nearshoring. So some of what I have on the slide comes from this recent report by McKinsey called Revamping Fashion Sourcing Speed and Flexibility to the Fore. There's a lot of talk of nearshoring.
Excuse me, Doc.
Yeah.
Sorry. 5 minutes.
Yeah, I only have 3 slides, so
thanks.
I'm on my second one. There's a lot of talk of reshoring. I don't think this is going to happen, but nearshoring is a clear possibility. And we see that with the rise of shipping costs, increasing prices of raw materials because of that. And already buyers have turned to Turkey, especially European buyers, as a better place to source textile. Buyers are also revamping their models where they want to reduce overstocks and shorten lead times even further. So they want to source from countries which are quite close to them. So this creates an opportunity, but at the moment, what we see is a lack of production capacity. So they want to nearshore, but they can't nearshore because there is a lack of production capacity in current countries. And I think Turkey is not going to be a long-term option for them. Or let's say if African countries could develop the capacity, they would be able to compete quite well with Turkey. And lastly, on the nearshoring, as part of that, buyers are looking to consolidate their supplier base, which poses challenges, and they're looking for suppliers that have vertical integration, that have digitalization, that can do small batches, and that have multiple factories so that they can hedge risks. So what does this mean? And this is my last slide. I think that there are great opportunities to build integrated textile industries in sub-Saharan Africa, but we need to think about it in a way that we haven't done yet. And how this fits into the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement is that a lot of this can be done at regional levels. So to stop thinking about competition between countries, but rather collaboration between countries and regions in West Africa and East Africa and Southern Africa, to build agglomerations of vertically integrated textile and textile clusters at the regional level so that not everything has to be done at the country level. And the second point is that we need to think differently about how go about this, because instead of starting from cotton, which is what is the tendency, we have to start from the buyer. You move from buyer to supplier to raw material. So I'm not going to go through all the details. I'll be talking tomorrow about this at the other roundtable on textile and apparel in more detail. But we can use the example of Ethiopia, how they've done this at a national level, and think about how it can be done at a regional level. And what they did is target buyers, and then buyers encouraged their foreign suppliers. They had plug and play industrial parks. They targeted textile and accessory firms so that you get all the bits at the same time, reducing lead time and capturing more value. You get industrial clusters based on buyer, supplier, and product. In terms of thinking about raw materials, if you go this way, then you think about what product are you producing, what textile type do you need, what raw materials do you need? Yeah. And then when you think about how can we get this raw material base in African countries, The best way to do this is through government intervention, but not where the government does it directly, but rather the government helps link textile producers to raw material producers and creates incentive packages around this, incentives for textile producers to do this and to provide the kind of support. And some of it will be agricultural, and some of it will be manufacturing, and some of it will be new recycling technologies. And so I think that to make African countries really competitive, it needs regional coordination. So you don't have to, you can diversify the different kind of textile and raw material base across several countries in a region. This can also be done through work with Mauritian firms, leveraging their knowledge and investments, but also Mauritian firms need to make themselves competitive in the global value chain. So they would have an interest to move in new types of textile production, fiber production. And this is mentioned in a recent report, which I have an image of on the left. And to conclude, I would say that going back to why you need to enter global markets in order to make regional and domestic markets competitive, is that this is the best way to build local firm capabilities and raw material producer capabilities. You need to leverage the foreign knowledge and leverage foreign partnerships. And of course, to do that, you have to have national and regional government industrial policies, but it's not the government on its own. It's creating foreign partnerships with local firms and bringing that knowledge into countries so that African countries can operate and create industries with frontier technology. And that will make them competitive regionally and in domestic markets. So you don't have to worry about tariffs or non-tariff barriers because you're competitive with any types of imports or secondhand clothing, and you're going to create the jobs that can replace the livelihoods dependent on the import trade and secondhand clothing.
Thank you very much, Prof, for that intriguing presentation. Thank you for challenging us to think broader, although the agenda here is the Continental Free Trade Agreement and the space where we need to be delivering or doing our trade within the continent, but there are opportunities as well to link beyond the continent when it comes to the cotton and textile industries. There are also aspects related to moving away from cotton, and that's quite an interesting one. What happens to those smallholder farmers that have invested so much and they're starting to emerge in the industry? How do we shift? It's one of those questions that happen as well, that the questions that, or the issues that we're contending with when it comes to moving away from unsustainable means, unsustainable energy sources. And when we talk about coal, how do we move from coal to renewable energy? And the people that are already involved in the coal production processes, for example. So those are interesting conversations that we need to have. We are out of time. There are a number of questions that have been asked there. But I think to respect our time contract, it would be noble for us to invite Prof. Ismail to deliver the concluding remarks. But I can be guided here if we can take one or two questions before Prof comes and then concludes the session. Prof.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Thanks, Prof. Are there any burning questions, one or two, that we would want to ask our panelists specifically regarding the value chains? There are some questions that have been posted already, and some have been responded to regarding the competition on leather, regarding the patterns that are found within the crops beyond just the soybean, what Grace was presenting there. Grace, would you want to respond to that question?
Yeah, sure. So we did actually do a comparison of margins in soybean relative to margins in maize. And we found that margins in soybean are actually significantly higher than those in maize. And we attribute this to potentially the extent to which maize markets are more regulated by governments. So you'll find that in specific years, there's export bans imposed or export taxes, whereas that hasn't necessarily been the case in terms of soybean. There's also the issue of derived demand of soybean, which also means that where there's increasing urbanization and increasing demand for certain consumer products such as poultry, edible oils, fish, the derived demand is much higher for soybean than it is for maize. The recent drought in South America has also contributed to the increasing prices in soybean and the extent to which traders can exploit the situation or the constrained supply that has arisen from the drought. So I think, yeah, that would be my answer.
No, thanks for that feedback. Maybe lastly, is that when we have these conversations and planning into the future, it's very critical to have all the key stakeholders participating in the engagements when coming with, so that we don't have that exclusion of the key participants. So for example, there shouldn't be anything that is done for the farmer without the farmer, lest we solve one problem and create other problems in other parts of the value chain. So all key stakeholders within the value chain need to be effectively engaged in our conversations. With that, thank you so much for this time. Prof, over to you with the conclusion remarks.
Well, thank you so much. I'd love to just give a big hand really to all the participants and especially to the presenters and to you, Dr. Nyoni, for facilitating this second session, and to Nontedu Vutula for really pulling this whole conversation together and drawing on her networks and bringing together such a fascinating group of experts from across the African continent. So it speaks to the rich expertise that exists and the willingness of colleagues across the continent to share insights, the information and knowledge. So thank you so much to all of you. This forum that we created is really about trying to build knowledge and to stimulate research in areas that help us understand better what the underlying structural challenges are on the African continent, but also to begin to identify where the opportunities are for Africa to transform. And indeed, today we have made a lot of progress, I think, in understanding the particular challenges that affect African agriculture. And you've also identified opportunities for us to transform. So thank you so much for that. You've also identified a number of research questions. And I think what we have done is we have created a dialogue, which I encourage all of you to continue post this webinar. Many of you have started that already in the chat. So we will be communicating with you and creating a community, of an interest group community in this space so that you can keep talking to each other and sharing information. So in this spirit, I want to say that the first set of speakers have done a remarkable job. So thanks to Antoine Bouy for really sharing the expertise that IFPRI has done and is continuing to do. You've really answered the big question that we had for today, which was, is the African continental free trade area a game changer in itself? Or, can it only be a game changer if it facilitates the building of regional value chains on the African continent and addresses some of those huge bottlenecks the non-tariff barriers, the need for trade facilitation, logistics and infrastructure in road, rail, and other institutional issues like SBS. So you have I think stressed the point that on its own trade will not work. But together with our addressing of the non-tariff barriers and infrastructure issues, it can be a very significant stimulus to growth and transformation on the continent. So thank you very much for that. And thank you to Professor Sylvester Mpandeli for your systems approach and your big picture multidisciplinary approach to water resources, making those linkages between water, climate change, food, nutrition, and economic development on the African continent. So thank you so much for that. And of course, my dear friend, Jane Ezirigwe, for really bringing a very innovative approach from her research on, answering the question of why is it, although we have so much of land, which is uncultivated, arable land on the continent, the largest amount in the world, why is it that we still import so much and we're so dependent on importing food? And of course, she says one of the reasons, one of the core reasons perhaps for this is the system of land ownership, which still needs to go through a major process of transformation. And that includes issues related to gender and traditional forms of ownership and governance of land. So thank you so much to you guys for the tremendous I think insights that you've provided us. The second set of researchers have, at least in 4 areas, you've identified the crops, the products that we produce on the African continent, where the opportunity appears to be enormous to grow those sectors, they build their competitiveness, and to do this through cooperation with countries across the African continent through the building of regional value chains. That's clear in the case of cassava. And thank you for Dr. Ibozo for bringing to us some of your experiences in Nigeria and the building of the agricultural processing zones. If you call them the special agro-industrial processing zones that you've established in Nigeria, and how effective that has been in cassava. And in leather, here there is an old story about how we have such a huge opportunity to process our very rich endowments in all sorts of leather products from different animals, but 80 to 90% of the wet blue is not processed here, but is exported. So big opportunity there for countries to work together to create value chains and process and finish. And then of course, use these for further leather processing at home. Similarly in soya, I think the discussion about competition policy and how countries need to cooperate on a regional level to create regional competition authorities so that we could reduce the gap in the high prices that are being, products are being sold for, whereas the small farmers get very little for it. And I think in cotton, we have, the massive opportunities there because, especially in West Africa, we have some of the largest producers of natural fibers and cotton, but there's a big gap between that and clothing production because we don't produce our own cotton textiles here in Africa. And there too, there are huge opportunities but I think Dr. Lindsay Whitfield has pointed to the need for us to align ourselves to the sustainability shift in global competition and perhaps leapfrog ahead and use these new opportunities to industrialize in Africa. So thank you so much to all of you for really inspiring all of us and perhaps stimulating a lot of new research by young researchers in all our campuses, and also perhaps inspiring policymakers on the African continent. This is what these webinars are for, and this platform is for. So we hope we've made a contribution to that, and we'll certainly share with you the reports from this webinar, and certainly the recording of this for your further research. So thank you so much to all of you, and I wish all of you a fabulous afternoon.